Colleagues, good morning. We are proceeding with our program. As with all other days, I thought it's always important to recap and to recalibrate so that we remain on course. Professor Kunene, when we started the first day, we started with a discussion around the contemporary politics of knowledge, simply to underscore the fact that knowledge is politicized, it's not neutral. And it's something that we tend to forget, that there's an ideology behind scholastic interventions. And the second was to talk about how the politics of knowledge find expression in the coloniality of power and the coloniality of knowledge. And we ask colleagues to rethink and think about how coloniality of knowledge and coloniality of power expresses itself in the daily practice in the classroom. We dealt with that aspect of coloniality of knowledge as a lens through which, or a tool we can use in terms of curriculum transformation. And we then, yesterday, what we dealt with was to indicate that ours is a very long walk to freedom, that our struggles do not start right now. There have been many other people who have been on this journey. And the idea of understanding that history is also to give us cumulative tools to be able to deal with today's challenges. And in doing so, we are alive to the fact that at every epoch, there'll be a nuance and a different approach and understanding. The context becomes very important. And as we dealt with that, we were empowered with the tools that will require to engage in the modern struggle. And as I said, that what got us here won't take us there. What we'll do all the time is a continuous refinement of our tools, a continuous refinement of our understanding, and the continuous refinement and also the development of new skills. So I thought we should put it there. But also is to understand that that transformation, change will not come without the pain. One of the things that I've asked Professor Mahola when he came back from the UK after spending, I said, 25 years later, what are the things that you have actually learned? He said that one of the things that he finds amazing is that people think that change can occur without a disturbance. And it says it is illogical because you need to understand that the people who are invested in the status quo, and any suggestion of changing status quo undermines the interests that are embedded, that are invested in the status quo. So change will always have that element of pain. So when you experience that level of pain, it should not come as a surprise because it leads to first disturbance of interest. But there's also something that happens, which we must appreciate, which was raised yesterday. It's where you may have something called cognitive dissonance, where things don't easily play themselves out. But as Professor Gacheni indicated, it is in the crucible of struggle that there's a refinement of thought, that the idea is not to be rejectionist, but to engage, to move into a space of dialogue. And only then can we get to some level of comfort. But we must also be alive to the fact that those who are not going to benefit into change that out. They will also display what was used, what was described beautifully as epistemic deafness. And what we are going to be doing now, having dealt with that framework, we are now going to get deeper into what does this mean in terms of curriculum transformation? What does this mean in terms of a curriculum? And this is what Professor Kacheni will be dealing with today, more as illustrative, because sometimes it helps to get guidance to those from those who have traveled the path. But we should not be so alarmed, because if we think about our own situation, you will discover what Paul Freire said more sharply in South Africa, and probably it happens everywhere else. That Paul Freire is famously known to have said the following, that there's no such a thing as a neutral educational process. Education either functions as an instrument that is used to facilitate the integration of the younger generation into the logic of the present system and bring about conformity to it. That's one part. Or it can be the practice of freedom, the means by which men and women deal critically and creatively with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of the world. The call to us is, how do we make education the practice of freedom, the means by which men and women deal critically and creatively with reality, and to discover how to participate in the transformation of the world. As those who are Marxists will know, statements like that are famous, where it says that we come into the world that is not of our own making, and the challenge is how to transform it. It is not only about what philosophers do, where they do a description and the explanation. It is also about the understanding must lead to the transformation of that world. Vice Chancellor, I was saying, in South Africa, we cannot pretend that there has not been a clear expression of intentionality in terms of our educational system. And Verwood was even much more clear when he says, when I have control of native education, I'll reform it so that natives will be taught from childhood to realize that equality with Europeans is not for them. And he went further, and this is what is least quoted, Professor Moyo. He says, we must take the implementation of separate development so that future governments will never be able to reverse it. This is an issue of deliberate intentionality, that even when something happens, the mark of coloniality remains. And what you do, you have new governments that continue to reproduce the same. And of course, that is only possible because, as Makoba said in 1997, what is common between a judge, a doctor, a politician, a policeman, a priest, a journalist, or editor, and the ordinary citizen is the type of education they received, or the curriculum that provided the foundations of their education. When people emerge with a sense of superiority and others come with a sense of inferiority, it is because of that type of education. If you read Mandela himself, he says the biggest challenge in South Africa is the superiority, is white superiority and black inferiority. So what we are trying to do is to disrupt that logic of the system. And of course, we cannot be blind to the fact that that education has had its effect. And Bigo put it very nicely, that the type of black man we have today has lost his manhood, reduced to an obliging shell. He looks with awe at the white power structure and accepts what he reads as the inevitable position, and celebrated achievement by whites in the field of science, which he understands only hazily, served to make him rather convinced of the futility of resistance and to throw away any hope that change may ever come. And this is also, when you listen to some of our scholars, what they express is the futility of this attempt to decolonize. They say, how can you do it? Where has it been done? But what they're doing is to express their own sense of inadequacy. So we engage in this process, VC, simply to unpack and also to anticipate. You know, when you go to war, and you can even see it with boxing, when a trainer is going to prepare the boxer to fight, what he does is to watch how the other person has fought, more to understand what are the strengths and weaknesses so that they can be exploited in the battle. That's why a trainer will always say, let's look at how the previous fights of this person. Then you realize that he's weak here. So part of our attempt is also to anticipate what is up against. Hence, the genealogy of the struggles and the journey that has been traveled by those before us. And it boils down to say, only then can we see further than they have when we stand on their shoulders. Professor Ndovukajene.
Good morning. And I'm happy I'm coming for the last time to this corner. I've been coming here now and then since Tuesday. I think one issue for certain which we need to put out clearly is that what coloniality introduces, it naturalizes it. So it naturalizes, it routinizes it, it makes it as though there was nothing before, there will be nothing after. That's one point. The second point coming from that is that it therefore creates discourses of impossibilities. When you try to change, it then creates discourses of impossibilities. Things are like this, what can you do? And what we are trying to do with the decolonial project is to denaturalize what was naturalized by some human beings, not by gods. And they naturalized it for a purpose because it gave them power. And it is important that we denaturalize that. And here I think the word is defamiliarize with that which actually oppresses you. The second issue, cascading from that, comes from Henrik Clark, who says we must be careful in listening to the powerful telling you how to take power from them. We need to be very careful. Only a foolish, powerful person will tell you the right method of taking power from him or her. So for the oppressed, for the dominated to listen to the powerful saying, no, don't do it this way, do it this way, don't do it this way, do it this way. You must know that they want to remain powerful. The third issue which I want to flag as part of opening this is to go back to, again, Paul Freire, who says a teacher must reveal himself or herself. if you go to class in order to build trust, you need to reveal yourself. And what does it mean to reveal yourself? If you are feminist, you must say you are feminist. If you are Marxist, you must say you are Marxist. I'm not sure those who are racist, you must say you are racist. And that way, we engage you knowing what you are about. And this also has an impact in terms of what you teach, because you need to explain why you teach what you are teaching. During my time, we were not as liberated as you are. During our time, whenever a professor comes to the podium, we were always running for our notebooks. We really asked what the teacher tells you is in the syllabus. But at the moment, we're talking about changing the syllabus itself. The syllabus is not coming from God, it's coming from somewhere. And we need to question the syllabus itself. So the whole issue of curriculum change is really to deal with the syllabus itself as part of changing the knowledge. And what I was trying to do here, I think I was given the heaviest load. And the heaviest load is that these are teachers. Not only teachers, senior teachers who are actually running colleges, running faculties. And it takes me to the question that Karl Marx posed. Who will educate the educator? Who will educate the educator? Some educators, they think they have reached the end of history. They cannot be educated at all. And here I find myself being thrown into that deep end to try and engage educators that you can still learn something. These were my opening remarks, but I think the other thing which emerged from the 4 days we were engaging is that we can actually produce better knowledge dialogically and conversationally. We will need to have more of these conversations, challenge each other, ask each other difficult questions, then we'll produce a better knowledge. The solipsism of René Descartes, let me go to a seclusion, let me meditate alone, and then produce knowledge, I think that one is very dangerous. And today, I don't want to take a lot of time, but I want to round off a number of things. I want to go back to the foundational questions. We started with the politics of knowledge, but I want also to underscore the issue that to do decolonization is not a fashionable thing to do. There are concrete content issues which force us to do that. And I said at the beginning that one content issue which we need to deal with from a Black African perspective is the existential question. So much so that it's not really a slogan, it's not really a buzzword. We need to put content to it to the extent that when we're now doing it and when it is in our blood and the hearts and the minds, we might even abandon to use the word decolonization and they actually do the changes which we need to do. So the existential question is at the center of decolonization in the sense that we're dealing with human beings whose humanity has been questioned. Human beings who at a particular moment they were reduced to commodities and sold on the market. Human beings who were colonized, racialized, feminized. And that, some people want to reduce it to an event which came and passed. But it looks like the implications of it are still with us today. And we need to take it seriously. The second content question in decolonization is a material question. The material question of a people who were dispossessed, exploited, and I'm not sure whether they are still not dispossessed and exploited today. This is why you'll find us struggling within universities about creating employable young people. And these employable young people, we need to train them in such a way that they speak the language of the employer, not their own language. And I don't know why the employer has a different language and the society has another language. That in Germany, the language which is spoken in society and the language is spoken in university is the same. Here, the idea that there is a language which when you go to industry, you will find somebody speaking another language. And you normalize it. That those who own the factories, those who own the mines, they are people of a particular character who speak a particular language. I think the decolonization in its totality must even change that. Then there is in terms of content, again, we need to always think historically. Where are we coming from? Where are we and where do we want to go? I think that is another important way of thinking about all the work which we're dealing with. And it is within that we put a fourth element, the epistemic question. And in the coming with the epistemic question, we begin to speak about the politics of knowledge. Knowledge might be, initially, knowledge was supposed to be knowledge for life. And when I'm talking about knowledge for life, I'm thinking when I'm growing up, I know which fruits of trees you can eat, which ones are poisonous. The knowledge actually comes from society, is not sold to me. Every child is exposed to that knowledge. And that knowledge, some people then they say, oh, it makes them survive, it makes them know what to eat, what not to eat, and all this. It looks like this thing called knowledge is a good thing. It can be captured and used for power purposes. This is where we want to liberate it from. It becomes knowledge for life. You capture it, you make it knowledge for domination and control. When he was talking about for food, he was expressing exactly that no, let's capture this knowledge. Let's use it instrumentally for purposes of domination, control, and exploitation. But we want to shift that and recalibrate knowledge as knowledge for life. Then I said the other 50 issue which we need to put as content is the development question. And that one is the most controversial. Development from what to what? But at the same time, you can't throw away, what do they call, the dirty water with the child itself. And they say, I'm against development per se. The issue being that even prior to colonialism, African societies have always engaged in self-improvement over time. From stone tools to iron tools, they were always self-improving. And then you'll find Marcus Garvey avoiding the word development and talking about Negro self-improvement. And so we need, as ourselves, to self-improve ourselves in our own terms and for our own good. And this also brings in the most difficult question, the question of identity in the decolonization debates. Who are we? What are we? What do we want to become? You can read from the ideologues of colonialism. They were engaged in a clear intentional process of making some Africans, Black people, into something else which we're not. And we need to have that restorative question. Then this takes me to the last issue, which is a content issue in decolonization, which is a perpetual question of self-determination and self-definition at a political, economic, social, cultural, and epistemic level. So basically, when somebody is saying, what are you talking about when you talk about decolonization, you need to begin to put this content into it so that you subvert this idea that it sounds like a slogan. What exactly are we talking about? So you can say, I'm talking about 6 or 7 issues. I'm talking about the existential question. I'm talking about the material question. I'm talking about the historical question. I'm talking about the epistemic question. I'm talking about the development question. I'm talking about the identity question. I'm talking about self-determination question. If he continues to say the slogan, then leave the person. And this takes me to the second set of reflections, because it takes us still to unpack what do we mean by decolonizing. I think at the moment we must now be able to put on the table some few reflections on what we mean by decolonizing. Of course, it means various things to various people, depending on their geopolitical settings, their social location, their epistemic location. But there are things which also bring us together. For instance, because we're dealing with the question of identity, there is also the idea that in decolonization, you will need to deal with the issue of achieving sovereign subjectivity. Sovereign subjectivity. And what does that mean? It means restoration of lost ontological densities. Restoration of lost ontological densities. And then secondly, it also tells us that the colonial process, the imperialist process, the capitalist process also operated through technology of dismemberment. Dismember, I think book Wathiongo talks about to demonstrate dismemberment. He says there was a dismemberment, a physical dismemberment of leaving other people in Africa and taking others across the Atlantic. That's a dismemberment. And then he talks secondly about an internal dismemberment which took place within the continent, in which at the Berlin conference, they drew all these diagrams, you here, somebody here, there, and they give you new identities. He says that's a second process of dismemberment. But he also talks about a third dismemberment, which says there is even physical dismemberment. And nowadays, it comes within the context of discourses on restitution, within which physically they captured those who were resisting, cut their head, dismember the body, carry the head, put it in museums somewhere. That's a dismemberment. And he gives us also the example of what happened during the Mau Mau in Kenya. He said those who were captured, the Kikuyu had this culture of burying their people with the heads facing Mount Kilimanjaro. But the colonialists, they will then bury you, the buttocks up, the head below, to show you that the world has turned upside down for you. That your world is gone, yours is down, something else is going to emerge. So you need to think deeply about this concept of dismemberment. It means so many things. And therefore, in the decolonization struggles, we then try to say, we are trying to rehumanize, to remember, not to remember in terms of memory. Remember, R-E, then hyphen, member, picking the pieces and joining them together. And that process must result in what Fanon will call new humanism. New humanism, to create new forms of life. And it is a generous project, the project of rehumanizing, because it is saying that even those who committed these dastard acts, we sympathize with them that these are fallen people. We want them to raise them up from that to the level of humanity. And Mandela was very good in that. That he says, when I was in the prison, I wondered, somebody captures you on the land, transports you to the island, and when the island is not satisfied that he has punished you, he even created a very small cell where you can't even turn. What type of a person is this? And they said, this, I feel pity for the person. This is no longer a human being. If I'm saved, I will save myself and I will save them. This is the new humanism which we are talking about. You remember that Mandela says the prison warders, whenever they came as individuals, one of them will smile at Mandela, how are you, Mandela? But when they came as a group, they were just brutalizing. And they said, I realized that there is still something which can be salvaged from their hearts. It is the system which also abuses them. And we need really to shift from. So the decolonization project is a broad project of rehumanizing both the dehumanizer and the dehumanized. So don't see yourself outside. If it is done correctly, it is for the good of everyone. Franz Fanon says, there is no way you can set afoot genuine decolonization if you are not inventive. You must be reinvent the humans themselves, particularly those who were oppressed, exploited, those whose history was stolen. You know, the concept of theft of history, that you steal a people's history in order to say they are not human beings, the theft of history. And he says, when we are really decolonized, we will re-emerge as a craftsman and a craftswomen. And what does that mean? People able to do things for themselves. People able to do things for themselves. That is what was stolen from them. That you are not able to do things for yourselves. We will do things for you. And that was crafted under what is called the civilizing mission. And this has implications even for our practices when we teach in universities. When I went to school, as I said, part of my childhood was under colonial rule, Rhodesian colonial rule. When I went to school, I thought this is what I was going to do. Going to school, get civilized, and get to know things, then come back and civilize my community. I think we need to shift from that thinking. We need to shift from that thinking. When I gave a keynote address at Wits University, sometime it was almost set up was like this. So I gave a keynote, I was standing at the center, not at the corner like here. And then people, when they were coming down, they were passing, thanks, bro, thank you. Thank you. Then a young woman came. Yeah, prof, now I got the thing. So I was happy. What did you get? Now I know what I'm going to teach my mother when I reach home. Maybe I no. There's nothing like that. There's nothing like that. I thought I was actually saying to you, when you go to your mother, you go and learn. Not to go and teach. What are you going to teach? Isn't it in Nguni societies, we say, indlela ibuzwa kwabaphambili. And abaphambili is not us. it is those people who are older than us. So the knowledge actually lies in the communities, not in the universities. And we need to go there to learn and then interpret, of course, write it into books, because they don't write it into books. That is our duty. So we need to shift that idea that we go to communities to civilize them. When we are thinking about border gnosis, border knowledge, it is the communities that is the border. This is where Kachabuteles was talking about his project of picking is good. What is remaining, the little which is remaining lies there in the community. And that is where we need to draw it from. The other element which comes out clearly from those who went before us is the idea that in order to colonize a people, you must kick them outside history. You must kick them out of history. You must kick them out of what we call the human family. Kick them out. You must also kick them out of what the Marxists will call mode of production. Kick them and bring them back in your own terms as providers of cheap labor. And a genuine decolonization, you need to restore them to history. You need to restore them to the mode of production so that they take charge of it. So it's really not a slogan. That's what I'm trying to say. And the Franz Fanon put it very well. For Europe, for ourselves, and for humanity, comrades, we must turn over a new leaf. We must work out new concepts and try to set afoot a new man. That is the message. For Europe, for ourselves, and for humanity, don't repeat the paradigm of difference which was created by colonialism. We don't work with the paradigm of difference in decoloniality. In decoloniality, we work with the paradigm of connections. We don't work with the paradigm of difference. We actually try to undermine the whole concept of difference. I think I've said enough on that. Let me move on to the third set of reflections. Now I'm turning to the curriculum question. What are we trying to do? We are doing two processes simultaneously. We are doing diagnosis and the prescription simultaneously. And we're using exactly the concept of dialectics. That when we are doing the diagnosis, it is meant to give you a correct prescription. So the first diagnosis which we've done, for lack of better word, we have realized that there is overrepresentation of European thought in thinking in Africa. There is overrepresentation of European thought and European knowledge. In whatever we do, there is overrepresentation. Everyone knows a good white scholar in every discipline, and perhaps nothing black, nothing African. So there is overrepresentation. And what do we do with overrepresentation? This is where the concept of re-provincializing emerges. This is where the concept of de-provincializing Africa, because where there is overrepresentation of a thought from a particular province of the world, it means it actually overshadows the other provinces of the world. So when we push it back and they say, Europe, very good, you are a tiny province up there, powerful, you have this knowledge which you have given us, but at the same time, we are a province of the world. There are other provinces of the world. Then other provinces will come to the table. So this is why we need to deal with two questions. the question of overrepresentation of European thought and the question of underrepresentation of African thinking. And we have concepts which we use because we engage in this struggle also producing concepts, usable concepts. Ngugi wa Thiong'o gives us the concept of moving the center. Moving the center. It is a very important concept of moving the center. And again, as I said, it depends how you read a text. Moving the center means a number of things. And the Ngugi explains it. That I'm not talking only about shifting from one geography to another. That's one element. But there is another element which Ngugi raises there, because Ngugi comes from the Marxist tradition. He also says we need to move the center from a small bourgeois men elites to the popular forces. The thought of the popular forces, the workers, the women, the youth, and all this. And he also then raises the third level of moving the center, which actually destabilizes patriarchy, saying we need also to shift from the dominance of men in the knowledge domain, so that we also take into account knowledge produced by women. So in that moving the center, he actually does a three-way move, a geographical move, but also a class move, but also a gender move. But you will not get that in Ngugi. If you wake up in the morning, Ngugi says no to European languages, you misrepresent what you say. You need to read really with the seriousness it deserves. Then from the Caribbean Philosophical Association, we get this concept, shifting the geography of knowledge. Shifting the geography of knowledge. And then they also develop it into shifting the biography of knowledge. And I think I explained that, when we are shifting the biography of knowledge, who is the knower? Who is the knower? And where is that knower from? Knowers cannot come from one geography. God never created anything like that. Then we ended up expanding that to say the intention which we want to do practically is to expand the shoulders of the giants on which we stand. Don't leave a giant next door to look for a giant in Germany. You don't need to do that. There are many giants who are not recognized as giants, who have been reduced to dwarfs, and we need to raise those giants. Untuli was talking about Pixley Rasem. That's a giant. It will need to stand on the shoulders of that giant. And there is nobody in Tuli who will do it for you. You need to do it yourself. Then the second issue which I want to raise vis-a-vis the curriculum, let me start with Michel Foucault. Michel Foucault is described as a historian of science. How many have heard that Michel Foucault is always described as a historian of science? And the one issue which he said, he was reflecting on disciplines. And the one issue he said was that disciplines emerged at a particular moment in human history to deal with particular problems. Disciplines emerge at a particular moment in human history to deal with particular problems. Without Euromodernity, we're not going to have sociology. Without the rise of the modern state, modern nation state, political science was going to be something else. So there were problems which, when disciplines were developed, they were supposed to grapple with. The social question. And I need to say something about the social question and the human question. Those who read what is called the Afro-pessimism, they raise a very interesting point, which makes it even harder what we are trying to do. Because they then say, do you know that the question of the social and the question of the human was developed against the black? The question of the human and the question of the social was actually developed against the black, against the native. In other words, if the humanities and the social sciences emerge from this problematic, how will we use it to liberate the black?
Yeah.
Because from the origination in modernity, it was against the black and against the native. I don't want to answer that, but I want to put it that way. But I was invoking Michel Foucault when he says modern disciplines emerge at a particular moment in human history to deal with particular problems. He is actually saying they are not natural. They are not natural. They were invented for a purpose. And if they were invented for a purpose, what is our duty now? Our duty now is to understand their constitutive formation. We must understand their fitness for purpose. We must always check, are they still relevant? We must always check the value for money in what we are teaching. People must not come here, pay fees, but you teach something which is irrelevant. So it's important that those who were enchanted by modernity, they created the disciplines to deal with the problems which were emerging from modernity. What about us who were subjected to apartheid, who were subjected to colonialism, who were subjected to enslavement? Do we just take those disciplines which were meant for a particular purpose and just run with them? Or we need to repurpose them? If we like them, we need to repurpose them so that they deal with our own problems, because the problems are changing. You can't say the problem of rising modern Europe are still the problems of today. We need to think for ourselves, are these disciplines still fit for purpose? It's not fashion that we have psychology, you have history, you have, after all, where is my brother who was talking about entrepreneurship? I think he's trying to come up with something new. So it's important that in this process of decolonizing, we will create other disciplines. We will create other disciplines which actually address the problems which we are facing today. And if we can't create anything new, then that's where the decadence comes in. The other issue which arose from the discussions here was the question of ideas and values. Ideas and values. And I think it's an important point to also think about ideas and values, because the normative values I'm talking to think about the normative values, because in knowledge there are hidden values, normative values, which actually drive the current knowledge architecture. If we try to distill those values, which actually are a post-enlightenment values, you will find that a value like progress, a value like social evolution, a value like emancipation, a value like development, it is hidden, but it is there. Even in theorizing, one of the interesting part of theorizing now is that there are scholars who are beginning to question even critical theory itself. to question critical theory itself. Amy Allen, who is at Columbia University, wrote a book which has an interesting title, Decolonizing the Normative Foundations of Critical Theory. Decolonizing the normative foundations of critical theory. A conservative thinker will say, why should you change critical theory? But her idea, he used the case study of the Frankfurt School. And they said, the Frankfurt scholars, they projected themselves as critical thinkers. But how critical were they? And he says, they were not evil people, but their critical theory was constrained by a normative framework within which they were thinking. And it was not Amy Allen who started that debate. It was started, in fact, by Edward Said, who challenged the Frankfurt School, and they said, you are saying you are critical theories. Why in your critical theory there is no enslavement, there is no question of enslavement, there's no question of colonialism, there's no question of apartheid, there's no question of gender. So how critical are you? And he then said, he answered for them the question. He said, I know what blinded you to these things. If you are working with the normative framework of progress, emancipation, salvation, development, colonialism appears as development. It appears as progress. So it is important that we shift the normative framework in which we theorize. Back to my brother, Nduli. Departure point here in African history, always the Mfekane. The Mfekane. You know, that Mfekane is not a pre-colonial event. Mfekane is actually an event which took place during the mercantilist period. Ilem, Ushaka was not born during the pre-colonial era. By the time Chaga was born, Afrikaners were already in the Cape Town since 1652. Chaga was not born in the 16th, he was born in the 17th. So we'll need to rethink the history. Where do we begin the pre-colonial and where does the colonial emerge? And this is very important for interpretation of history, because people will not understand why the Mfekane ever took place. Who was at the Cape? Who was at Delaware Bay? And who was in Natal? And who was pushing people to fight at the center here? What were the pressures? There was an encirclement complex which was developing from the coastal areas, pushing the people to hit against each other at the center. And that's what actually produces the Mfekane. So it is important that we think, because the issue of South Africa is very important, because it is coterminous with the time Christopher Columbus went to the Caribbean and Latin America. It happens at the same time. After all, they once shared a ship in West Africa when this one was coming down, going east, when that one was going the other side. So it's part of a mercantilist period. And we will need to understand it that way, so that every time we say pre-colonial, we need to put it in quotation marks. Somebody who is born a century after the Afrikaners were already there, how pre-colonial is that person? The second issue, I belong to the Ndebele-speaking people who are today concentrated in a small area in Zimbabwe. The traditional argument is the Ndebele were forced out of South Africa by King. Charles. How true is that? How true is that? Chaka was assassinated in 1828. Mzilikazi crossed the Limpopo in 1838. 10 years after the death of Chaka. How did he push him after death? How did he push him after death? There are people who pushed him. And why he moved 1837, 1838. Who was coming from the Cape into the interior? Don't you know the Great Trek?
Yeah.
Those were the people who were coming into the interior. Those are the people who pushed the Ndebele into Zimbabwe. But up to today, the tradition is that it was a Chaka who pushed them into that area. In Zimbabwe, we have Kekle called African. Where did Mzilikazi take them? The Battle of Verwood in October 1836, the Ndebele attacked a group of Afrikaners and they took the Kekle and they went with them to Zimbabwe. So somebody interviewed me saying, AmaNdebele namaZulu, have they reconciled inkomo ezathathwa nguShaka ezathathwa nguMzilikazi? Mina no, but inkomo esahamba lazo ngezamabhunu ngaphandle ngalifuna lezi. So that's what we needed to do to interpret the history from our own vantage point. That is enough on the curriculum. I want to move on because I don't want to take too much time. One issue, practical issue, which emerges is the question of there must be a clear reason for decolonizing curriculum. You must be able to give a rational reason for decolonizing the curriculum. And the one which nobody will dispute is the question of relevance. Curriculum must be relevant. There are other aspects. I'm actually involved at the moment with a project which is commissioned by SAICA, the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants. And the project is born out of a very concrete problem. Why is it that in terms of attainment, in terms of pass rate, Black African students don't perform well? So it is a commissioned project in which I was commissioned to do the curriculum part. And in that curriculum part, my work was to look at the structure of knowledge in accounting science. No knowledge can have a vertical structure or a horizontal structure. And to understand the structure of knowledge has implications for your pedagogy, how you teach. You see, I was talking about history here. All of you understood. You don't need to go to grade 1 in order to understand what I was saying, because the structure is horizontal. But the mathematics is not like that. If you don't know 1 + 1, you can't know anything else. So that one is accumulative. So we deal with that question. Then we also deal with the question of materials. What are the materials which are used in accounting? And when we also deal also with the issue of the curriculum itself. Where does the curriculum come from? It's a professional, it's an academic come professional field in which you do a degree, then you do the other training to be a chartered accountant. And one of the issues is that SAICA seems to control the syllabus. And we were looking at who is teaching in that, both in the academic side and in the professional side. And our question of who is teaching is a profession, isn't it? Where there are so many teachers here. Teaching is a profession. not that when I have a PhD, I'm now a teacher. It doesn't work that way. People needs to also know how to deliver. I can be very astute in my own knowledge, but fail to deliver to others. So it's important that we find that. And we also checked also the issue of language, examples which are used in the books which are used to teach. Do people relate to those? And then we also investigated the issue of assessment. You know, there are people, because of this issue of lack of professional teaching, people who do negative assessment. In every paper is looking for what is not there. Doing like a poem when he assesses whatever I'm saying. You did not say this, you did not say this, you did not say it. Don't look for what is not there. First of all, look for what is there in the first instance. So that you try to salvage rather than to destroy. Then the other practical question which emerges from our discussions here, I think by now you know who will do the curriculum reform. I think by now you know. There is nobody who will come from somewhere to your disciplines and do the curriculum reform for you. It is the disciplined best, discipline specialists who wrote the wrong curriculum and they must write the right one. I don't know, yesterday I heard another prescribed curriculum. Who is prescribing the curriculum at a university? Generally at a university, when I arrived in Germany, Germany is even organized in a more interesting way. There are programs, modules you can change at any time. So when I came, because I was coming from University of South Africa, where there is a cycle of when you want to introduce a 5-year cycle, when you want to produce new, they said, no, here, next semester, what do you want to teach? Tell us what you want to teach. And then we put it in the program. There is nobody who waiting for 5 years or 7 years to change. They don't do that. So I teach decolonial theory, first year at undergraduate in anthropology. I teach empire, colonialism, and decolonization at master's level in global history. I also teach development in post-colonial Africa for masters, and I teach knowledge in development studies at master's level. Then I teach liberation movements and the social orders in Southern Africa. That comes from me. Nobody else tells me what to do. As long as I can draw the curriculum and satisfy them, that's how it works. Then this one is for the Vice Chancellor. Decolonizing curriculum is expensive. And we will need to budget for it. Initially, I said I was also going to talk about the Node on African thought. I thought that was ambitious of me. I don't know what the Node of African thought is. I need to listen to you. This is your project here, but these are a few reflections which I wanted to share. What is the soul and the heart of the academic project at UNESCO? And I thought with the Node for African Thought, you are actually defining that soul and the heart of the academic project in UNESCO. And then the second point, I think I raised it, is the issue of thinking with our feet on the African ground. I think if you want to project African thought, you must always think with your feet on the African ground. And I'm talking about African ground in its expansive, the continental and the global Africa. And when I was also saying, when we're doing that, we must also think from where we are. I think that one came out many times from the engagement. And the fourth point, taking African thinkers seriously. And turning yourselves into African thinkers, yourselves. And turning yourselves into generators of knowledge. And the fourth aspect, taking the African archive as a departure point. And the big Tuntuli, engaging the deep histories of Africa. The deep histories of Africa. They don't start in 1652. Thank you so much.
BC, I still have time. I see Morgan is already anticipating to come here. And I see also Professor Nomlom has a question. And Professor Adigum also has a question. Or comment. Maybe we should start in that order. Dr. Akpome, I would like you to give me 3 things that you've heard. If you are asked to forget everything that has been said, but to remember 3 things. What are those 3 things so that you are taking? Professor Nomlom.
Oh, are you asking me to?
Or you're raising it?
No, just to say thank you for I have about 3 issues from here that I want to comment on.
Yeah, sure.
The first one is that throughout these 4 days, this is the 4th day of interesting, and you've taken us through, and that was explained when we went across here to the this morning. And what came to my thought this morning was that with all this, what we do, are we starting on a blank slate? Is there something that we can build upon as we move now in with regard to the operationalization of the issue of decolonization, particularly when it comes to curriculum? And I came to realize that we're not starting on a blank slate. There's something perhaps what we would say in my language. I don't know how is it called in other languages. There's something that we will through some the traditional like to call it. I don't know how the East. That of course that is the colonial term. What we do we did a kind of explore the issue of decolonization. But I think you have challenged us to think deeper on what we have. Last year we had some discussions which were led by all the faculties were involved, and many of the colleagues were in those task groups. And we developed a concept paper, which we are refining at the moment, led by the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences. And the project is run by Prof. Verwood and Dr. Fanon. We are currently refining that. And that leads to Prof. CF's comment earlier this morning when he said we must be engaging in continuous refinement of certain issues. So refining those concept paper. And I think you have given us some food for thought in terms of the gaps in the concept paper itself and in terms of the contradictions that might be there. And I'm very hopeful that after this brief discussion, we will be able to move forward, and we will also happy on your expertise and your experience as an institution. And what makes me happy is that is the involvement of other faculties who always think that if you talk about issues of history and decolonization, you have to go to the faculty of humanities. But that is not the case. All faculties have been involved, and I think we have to learn together and we take that further. We have to do some kind of reflection and try to see how to take the conversation deeper down in the faculty. That is the project that we will be starting soon. And the second point that I want to make is with regard to the curriculum itself that we talk about, as to say, with all what you have engaged us with this morning, I was just thinking about your earlier comment. I think you said it yesterday, I'm not sure, the issue of knowledge and reality. And I was just thinking to say, as we reflect on our current curriculum, because as I'm saying, we're not starting on a blank slate. We have our curricula, but it's a matter of looking at it and looking at its relevance at this point in time, and what we want to do. You have challenged us to take responsibility and where we want to move with regard to our curriculum. And but I was also thinking that as we move along with the issue of curriculum and transformation, we must take into account the realities, our contextual realities. For example, you mentioned the involvement of our communities. You repeatedly said that over the past few days, as we say, how can we capitalize on the wealth and the richness of our community? And I think we are well placed as ministry in so many ways. There's linguistic and cultural capital that we can tap on, and we already engage with the communities. And how do we take that kind of knowledge? It came from some of these studies in our book. But I also want to say, perhaps this should not be the finishing point, because here we are academics. And when we implement curriculum, it's not only academics, we have to take it further. We have to involve our professional staff, we have to involve our students. So what role, I think that's what we should be thinking about as, all of us, as we say, how do we engage our colleagues, our communities, that is the professional support staff, as well as our students, in the terms that we have referred to ensure that whatever we teach, we address the issue of epistemic injustice. And the last thing, Prof. I know that yesterday there was an issue, and you raised it this morning, Prof. The issue of institution. And I know that because there was a short discussion about it yesterday. And I must also declare that, by the way, last year we developed 4 concept papers, and entrepreneurship was one of the 4 concepts we developed. And I'm thinking about entrepreneurship in relation to the realities. The realities, as to say, in higher education, the biggest challenge, of course, is the unemployment of our graduates. Lack of jobs. We confronted with quite a number of issues. And I know that there was an issue as to say that we're not preparing billionaires or millionaires, but the real thing is that they don't get employed. But how can we equip them to ensure that they have a role to play in the economy? Because currently the economy is in the hands of the white minority. And I think equipping them with that's my view, equipping them with entrepreneurial skills, I don't think it's a coloniality matter. I'm just thinking that it's a matter of how we transform our curriculum, as we say, that there are things that we have to change, there are things that we can keep. And I think I will stop there. Otherwise,
Yeah, actually, for those who are going to speak, I do not want to have a repeat of what he had said. Professor Nomlomo was simply expressing her happiness and how she's challenged. I hope she can take all that into the faculty, into those spaces. A repeat of what was said.
I wanted to intervene very shortly, particularly about the entrepreneurship. My critique was not against entrepreneurship, but I was saying you need to approach entrepreneurship from
Yeah.
yes.
And that fundamentally means that this is why I was talking about craftsmen and craftsmen.
Yes.
People who do things for themselves.
Yes.
Not to create business people,
Yes.
Yeah,
but people who are able to do things for themselves.
Yes.
Across board.
Yes.
That to me is what we need to rethink entrepreneurship. Not in this narrow sense,
yeah,
but it must have the social aspect,
Yes.
the economic aspect, the political
Yes.
aspect, and the various aspects of it.
Yes.
So it would be great, really. How do you think about it from a economic? Not to throw it.
Yeah,
away.
exactly.
No, that's not what I'm suggesting.
Yeah, that's why listening is very important. Professor Adugun.
Yeah, thank you very much. I like the things that have been thrown out, and that's where my question is coming from. I like the issue of material question, which helps us to think about dispossession. So I then picked up that the language spoken by the industry and the public needs to be unified. How do you do that? So that's my first question.
The language spoken by.
Industry and the
The industry and the public.
Yeah.
You said
Yeah,
we should
yeah, sure.
rather we should not say that students are not speaking the language of the industry. But that means we are saying the industry language
yeah, sure. Yeah,
is superior to
yeah,
that it should rather be there should rather be a unification. I thought that's what I meant.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one is a deeper question. The deeper question about who owns what and who was what.
yeah,
So the really a question, why are we no longer talking about position? Why are we talking about position?
yeah,
So it's a deeper political question. Why, if I want to go to industry, I will find example not like me. When I go to industry, I'm certain I will find example my life. Is that normal? So that's what I was trying to say, but don't take me that.
yeah. Professor Dr. Akume, I'm saying professor because I'm hopeful. You know, Professor Ngugachini said you have the habit of, you know, so we correct that habit. But I still want you to problematize some of the issues that I imagine from the submission. Problematize, and not repeat what you said. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good morning, colleagues. Thank you very much, Professor Cheney. My dominant impression is stop it. I like it. You've taken us through 4 days that I feel like I want to go back to school.
Sure.
So sorry, Prof. Siete, I might repeat 1 or 2 things that resonate very strongly, but I will still try to communicate.
I'd like to see that in terms of what would it mean for you in your daily practice. Remember, the most important aspect is not so much that we like what we hear. is how does that assist us in changing what we do?
So the first one for me will be what you said when you reminded us of what the truth said about the deliberate intentionality of instituting ideas, policies, structures, frameworks, with the clear mind that this would be irreversible. In my place, we have a saying that you can't jump across a ditch or a stream in 2 steps. It is one go. If you leap, you must calculate such that the way you leap will land you on the other side. For me, that means we must do away with half measures. We must not consider, and I think we are too apologetic. I think we tend to be very apologetic, whereas those who perpetrate the system, in starting this system that we continue to struggle, have been struggling against for centuries, and in perpetrating this system, these guys are not apologetic. They do what they have to do.
Okay, that's number one.
They do anything to do what they have to do.
1, 2.
I found that number two,
I want to give, there's some people who are going to talk here. Continue.
Yeah. I'm very impressed with the point that came to me in a new way from the guest speaker, that knowledge belongs to the society, and the way it was in indigenous society, it wasn't encrypted to be sold. It was there for people. And then the system we are talking about is one that has captured knowledge. I'm thinking of this now, also in response to what was said yesterday. The system has weaponized knowledge. And this is where, Chair, I think many of the anxieties that I first have about OIR and all this is where it comes from, because these are architectures of surveillance. These are architectures, the one huge problem I have, and maybe guess is, okay, we have to use these new technologies. But everything we do here resides in hard drives somewhere in California. If Teams doesn't work for 5 minutes, then institutions will die. If Zoom, for any reason, seizes your recording, you're in trouble. So, and if we look at the Ukraine situation, we see how the modern system weaponizes everything, everything that can be fought with will be fought. So how do we prepare for that while we do not shy away from that? And then I think perhaps the last one, for me, there's so much here, is the need for grammars and vocabularies of change, which is what we have been talking about in the institution when we started coming up with the idea of the African thought. And I really like what when we made reference to Garvey's use of self-improvement as another way to shift the emphasis away from the concept of development, because that is a very loaded concept. And my friend here, Morgan, always says we must be careful to trace the genealogies of terminologies before we transplant them. He often says that in regard to the idea of the worker. Many of us think of the work as a good thing. But if Morgan gives you the genealogy of the worker, you would wish you never work in your life, and how it doesn't apply to you. So that is why, for instance, I am still pushing the idea we must be careful of some of the terms that are used, like the idea of alternative knowledge. And Prof. Moyo took me up the other day to say it's not meant as inferior, but it does, if you trace the genealogy and also the term informal, how almost every indigenous mode of expression and mode of life of the non-European is branded as informal. It's thereby devalued. It's also the same response we have to the oral archive. And we think, for instance, and I used to think that until very recently, until Professor Verwood came, and I was properly schooled by himself and so that the oral is not documented. That's not the oral is documented in our memory archives. So well,
thank you. That's a grammar. Professor Shogani, you were going to say something. I know Professor Adugan still has a question for you. And VC?
to say it.
Okay, okay.
You might even forget what you want to say. But I think it's the right time for me to say what I want to say before you and anyone else, because I'm going back to Professor Mlom's response. And I just want to establish a principle of dialogical self, because I think that's where Prof. Mlombo finds herself this morning. She's talking to herself, but herself is us here in this room. So I want us not to ever, Prof. said, miss opportunities where we are confronted with ourselves, looking at the mirror and saying, where are we? Because the first question she asked, she said, are we starting on a blank slate? That's finding yourself in this forest that we've entered into. And I want us to use that as a metaphor to say, we find ourselves marching and going into a forest where we don't know what we find in it. Therefore, I said on Monday, we're going to now and again find ourselves regressing, saying, is this the right direction? We're asking questions now. Having done some work last year, we're doing some kind of no, we're regressing, but we are saying, where are we now? Are we starting on a blank slate? Because what Professor Ndlovu has actually done to us, he has taken, like you said, not in the form that Ndlovu put it, that like our heads are upside down. So now we are disturbed, disrupted in our ways of thinking. So I think if we want to walk in this journey of love for African thought, we must accept that there are moments where we're going to find ourselves asking questions, whether we lost, are we someone yesterday here, I hope he was not offended when you said, somebody said, where do we start? And I said, we've already started, and I declared that we've started. So I think, Professor Nomlomo, I would like to encourage you as a leader in terms of teaching and learning to continue asking yourself and talking to yourself to find yourself in this space. So that's what Prof. said I wanted to say. We should not be tired or repeating or trying to repeat what Professor Ndlovu has said to us. Even if we mess up in the manner in which we interpret it, but we're going to find it, because we're going to have to hold each other's hand in moving forward and say, actually, you mess it up there. That's not what was said. This is what was said. And to me, this is, we said yesterday, we should open up this space and understand that we're going to learn and relearn. And if we want to do that, therefore, we're going to repeat some things. And I want Prof. as a person that I'm going to trust to work with us in this journey, that he must have patience as we mess up, as we, like Abandona, when you feed the child, you know, you want to take it in, but the child takes it out, but wants it in. That's how we are going to be, and we should be allowed to be as such. I want hands for this.
Yes.
Yeah. I think
Facilitate, we want to have more patience for us to work the baby steps and mess up, push it up on.
yeah.
Now, give us an opportunity, because Professor Gateni is here now, and he must see us who we are in a true sense. We can't pretend to know and understand when we don't. We must mess up so that he corrects us again. So that's what I want. I want little opportunity so that we are corrected by an expert. When we are alone here, we're gonna hold our hands and say, DVC, that's not it. This is the way we go. So thank you very much. I just
Okay.
needed to put that there so that we with ourselves.
Professor Mtose, when you're done in having a dialogue with yourself, write down that dialogue so that we can engage it.
Yes,
But do it after you have gone through the process of having that dialogue.
yes.
But when you're having a dialogue and in a space like this, we'd like to have a more critique so that after that, we deal with it. But also we must take responsibility that some things are not the responsibility of me or the guest.
Yes.
Those things that you must do, you must actually do them there and point out, actually the same point that I was saying yesterday, that it becomes also very important to say, what is my responsibility? For instance, the question that was raised yesterday is that how do we do it? Where do we find the time? And we responded by saying, you create the time as you have. But we're not saying people should not have a dialogue with themselves. But once they are done with the dialogue with themselves, say, this is what has emerged from my dialogue. This is the point I'm trying to make. That they think through, have that dialogue yourself, but they enter the space having done that dialogue. Not simply repeat that. That is the only, I'm not opposed to people being wrong, but I'm also saying it doesn't take us further to, you can actually say, I'm happy, and like Professor Dr. Kupumi was saying, stop it, I'm happy. One sentence, then we go to the next. Can I ask Professor Shogani to enter the space? And Adigunu, you come back.
Thank you, Chair. I initially didn't want to say anything. He was saying to me, it is not fair. I was actually trying to share what we are doing in the social way, because we actually started from global decolonizing of the country. And I think also Prof. Gacheni, you were modest explanation of it, because you were supposed to have been prepared according to your book, the one on epistemic freedom, socialization and decolonization, where you indicate that for one to understand the process of decolonization, we must start with doing the doing the dirty history when you're able to unpack that. And this actually, when you refer to the curriculum, what I like to say, actually, where does the curriculum comes from? And if we take it back, like even to the student protest in 2015, when they were raising concerns about the roads must fall and things like that. For us in the social profession, we took it from that angle, from them, and as what you're saying, and those voices. Then that's when we even thought of decolonizing the curriculum. So I was part of the group that actually spearheaded that. So even when we say about the prescribed, we can safely say even here in social work, we're the one who's driving the curriculum of social work in the country, so that it should reflect the needs of the people in the communities. Even in research document, maybe things, we do lots of things which we're not actually reporting. We have a book, most people I know they research at grassroots, humanities and social sciences. Now we have included even a chapter on how to colonize research methodologies. So also appropriating of what you said, what I pick up, most people they don't read books actually. They pick up, I know some people like now, I'm sorry colleagues, we pick up concepts and things like that, but it's very important that we go back, you read in your field. There should be something in your field where there's a gap. That's where we start slowly introducing the curriculum, looking at the terminologies and packing it to our content it's as much as the VC and the management have the vision, but it's us in our disciplines, respective disciplines, where we can unpack what does it mean this for our curriculum? What does it mean this for our students? It's only us who knows what to teach, knows what to, where we can introduce the glossary of terms. So it's not the glossary of terms for them to understand the those difficult things. So I don't think we are trying starting from scratch. It's just that maybe we're working without even knowing that what we're doing, we're trying to decolonize the country. And I still challenge my colleagues, Dr. Tuli, those gaps in history, it's you who's supposed to close them. There's no other person who can close the gaps. It's just that for one thing colleagues want you to know, once you see gaps, identify those gaps, include them, speak to us, speak to the BBC on how you can be supported. I'll give an example with Dr. He has a brilliant idea on what he wants to do. But I said, how much will this cost? Because you can't say I want to do this, but it's a budget. So put a budget to that and we'll support you. The BBC will support you. So it's not that as the university we're not doing anything. There is something that is being done, but maybe that conscious consciousness is not there. That what we're trying to do is part of the decolonization.
Professor Adjung.
Thank you, sir. I wanted to comment on the need to realize that decolonization is not fashionable. And that just sort of reminded me of what we did in about 10, 12 years back about IT, when we said we were going to make IT sexy. And that's what we did, because now all young people in South Africa want to go into IT related. So I take that to heart, that's what science is going to do. We have already also started something, and we're going to make decolonization sex.
Yeah. And the most important submission, again, Lulu, thank you very much for the issue of reading. Also reading the text that we have written ourselves. This becomes very important, so that if you don't read the text that we have produced, then you don't take yourself seriously. That's why the notion that Professor Kacheni was saying also about taking ourselves seriously. It's about reading. It's about rigor. It's not about simply being on stage. It's have you really interrogated the material? Sometimes it helps to say, this I have not read. For instance, we came up with new terms here: cognitive justice, epistemic freedom, and all that stuff. Some people may not have, but what it means is that you go back, and it's also good that we have also a scholar of decoloniality who has actually written, the list I'm going to be leaving here, it's more than 12 books that deal with various aspects. But what he was also saying about the issue of fashion and the fad is to be able to elucidate a number of elements that gives a justification, a legitimation of the project at a number of levels, so that you don't say, oh, where the rose must fall, and then it ends there. But it's to simply say it's a quest for justice, it's a quest for humanity and knowledge. And what he was offering are the tools of engagement and the concept of engagement, and also the weaponry that is actually necessary. But what was also important is how this does not subtract but adds. So I think I thought that there was going to be a comment. People were asking if they can comment from online, but there's nothing that has really come through. Is there any other person before I call him? Oh, Professor Dr. Ntude?
Professor, you have said so many thought-provoking things. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to engage here. Let me go straight to the curriculum issue. And I'm aware that we have already started, but I think this is a process. So let me ask this question. Is it possible to decolonize the curriculum without decolonizing the mind? For example, if the mind of especially the discipline specialist is not decolonized, how possible for him to decolonize the
Yeah, before you answer that, there's a question online. You can unmute side or sit and then speak.
Thank you, Chair. Colleagues, it's Professor Syed from Department of Biochemistry Microbiology. I'm attending this decolonization since last year, and I'm also trying to understand. Sorry, I'm from different background from India, but I'm a South African now. I see this is a good initiative, and it is very highly appreciated that our university started this process very diligently. I just have a little 2 or 3 comments in this one. We must be very careful because this decolonization of curriculum shouldn't lead to the discrimination, or else some of you who faced apartheid, I mean, you know better than me because I have no idea. That's what my little bit, worried. The decolonization should be done in such a way that it shouldn't lead to the discrimination. Also, this curriculum decolonization at our university, what is happening is good thing, but this also shouldn't isolate our students, because we don't want them certainly to be a local level. We want them national level and international level also. I'm sure you all know some of the scholars also mentioned these things. Also, like one of the scholars also mentioned that if it is not market related or not competitive enough, the curriculum, we will see not student enrolling this one. I mean, you are all stalwarts in this issue, so I just want to share my thoughts. So when we proceed with this slowly implementing this decolonization, we have to be a little bit careful, mind all these comments, because being a father, I want to see my child to have a future. For example, let's say having some kind of a curriculum education, which doesn't give any job, at the end of the day, the same situation our students also will be facing. So I'm sure you all know all these things. I just want to share my thoughts with you guys. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Professor Ndlovu will respond to that, although I know that that has already been touched. I mean, it's also the question of concealment. What is not being said is how the majority get excluded in the system. You should just look at the performance of kids because of the curriculum that we have. We lose about 1 million kids because of the type of education that every year who are driven out of the system when they should not. But if you don't have access to that reality, you actually think that the system as it is, it's working, when it actually is not working for the majority. So the issue is, how do you bring more of the people so that you don't have this suffering? I mean, again, it goes back to the scholarship of concealment and the concept scholarship of revelation. And that becomes very important. And it's one of those things that Professor Ndlovu had also dealt with, that what is the reality of the majority? And the whole notion of even decolonization, it's also about the provincialization of Europe, that Europe is simply a province of the world. And how can that be okay when the rest of the world is excluded? How can that be enriched knowledge? And what you are saying is that this is about correcting and improvement. It's not about subtracting. So if people understand it from that way, then they can then understand how the other people, how it expresses themselves, how the status quo expresses to other people. And then it's not really about exclusion. It's about making sure that when an African child enters the world, does not enter as a third or fourth world citizen of the world. And this is Africa, and we need to deal with that aspect. And that is what the message is not about undermining anything, it's about improving that which exists. Professor Brown.
Should I come in now?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, well, I think there are a couple of things that I want to probably touch on one other session is coming. But I think the message that I picked around the conversation so far is around call for reimagination.
Yeah.
And here we are looking at reimagination of the self, reimagination of the curriculum itself, reimagination of the university, and also a reimagination of how we deal with the community and the society in a broader context. And I thought that perspective, when we look at it in relation to the purpose of education, the grand purpose of education, some of which Prof mentioned as we were going through. But I just want to call on one around restoration. We need to emphasize bringing ourselves back.
Yeah.
So education is not about finding jobs or helping someone to create jobs or to find jobs, as was mentioned just now. That's not the purpose of education. If that was the purpose of education, then nobody needs to go to school, because you would then need to be able to create your. So what we have now, if we say education is for finding jobs, we are then driving towards a servitude education. We are creating servants. We should not position ourselves to say education is for servitude. It's a bigger project now. And so that must be knocked out of the way. And the grand purpose of education we maintain, and we drive the reimagination project in such a way that we can capture the essence of what Prof mentioned in the morning, which I don't want to repeat them as you said, you don't want to repeat them. But just for the sake of some issues, the first one being around survival, the existential question.
Yeah.
So how do we survive as an oppressed?
Yeah, sure.
In a world that is constantly driving to oppress us even further. So that is part of it. Of course, the material issue was mentioned, and I'm emphasizing the restoration portion of it, among other things that you mentioned.
Yeah. I think I'll ask Professor Ndovi to say just a few words. As you do that, I would like you to emphasize the importance that you always, which you are an example of taking yourself seriously. If we don't take ourselves seriously, if we don't invest in thinking, if we don't invest in reading and writing, we're not taking ourselves seriously. Otherwise, we reduce this place into a beer hall where it's simply gossip, not scholarship. That is very important, because when you go out there without doing what he does, without writing, thinking through stuff, and quarreling with yourself, and then putting it out there for critique. And the part of the problem is really that, as he was saying, the over-representation of a particular thought. And it happens because we also allow it. How do you explain that the majority of people are not participating in the thought processes and the production? Part of it is because we don't take ourselves seriously. So the notion of taking ourselves seriously means that we do the spade work. And as Lulu says, reading, writing, thinking through stuff, redefining, reimagination, and the whole understanding that this is about restoration, is not about this destruction.
Should I just say I concur with everything which you have said? I think there are a few issues which are matters will always arise as we engage this way, and that is in the nature of engagement. And we need to continuously, when it is provocative, another matter will arise. That's how knowledge progresses. If it was not like that, we could have closed universities long ago. We could have answered all the questions. But every time you say this, something else arises. Every time you say this, something else arises. But I think from is it Professor Nomlomo? coloniality is never tired. That's one point which it is never tired of sustaining itself. And I'm not saying she said she was tired, but I'm picking from what she was saying that maybe this point needs to be also pushed forward. Other people, they get tired of this struggle. It's a long-standing struggle. The initiatives which have been attempted also have a long history. And as long as we feel the pains of how coloniality operates, we need to continue the struggle. That's one point. The second issue, which arises from Nomlomo's intervention, is the stakeholders of this university. Students, I'm not sure whether here there are labor unions, women forum, and all the stakeholders. We will need really to try to mobilize ourselves for a purposeful, intentional project. And I think it is important that we try to bring everyone into thinking about this. My brother there about entrepreneurship, I didn't give him a very satisfactory answer when he asked the question about the material question. I think the material question, particularly in this country and in all those countries which particularly suffered secular colonialism, it's a central question which we need to think about. If we mention dispossession and the destitution of a people by a system, we need to also think about how to restitute. So it's important to think about how to restitute, and the knowledge must actually also play a role in restitution and the repossession. The fourth IR, every time you try to be critical about it, a red card is always raised. Don't be like the Luddites. No, the Luddites who were destroying machines. Don't be like the Luddites. But I think the fourth IR, it needs also to be approached with a critical mind throughout. Achille Mbembe said there are two things nowadays which are dominant. Either is apocalyptic thought, the world is going to come to an end, or is technolatry. You know, from idolatry, technolatry. Technology will solve our problems. These are two extremes. We'll need really to also approach the issue of technologies critically, including from a historical point of view, going back to my fellow historian there. To say it is the fourth industrial revolution is a question of time. Which revolutions are you counting? Which one is the first? Which one is the fourth? In Africa, where even the first revolution has not taken place, where do you arrive at the fourth one? So that critical thinking needs to come into that. If we're a fourth industrial revolution, thinking from the continent, which one was our first? Which one was our second? Which one was our third? Are we actually the fourth, or we're yet to start maybe the first one? Then is it Shokane? You raised the issue of the road must fall. I think that moment must not be taken lightly. It is getting lost now. But I think it was supposed to be a rupturing moment in our context in this country. And there were things which were put forward forcibly by the Roads Must Fall movement. The first one was really about what type of universities do we want? The second one was the type of iconography and the symbolisms in universities. The third one was the language question. The fourth one was the financing of higher education. And the fifth one was the labor question, the outsourcing and the exploitation and the casualization of black labor. So we can build from that. What have we done since that time? So it was really a rupturing moment, which at the end of the day, we cannot actually wish it away. We need to measure ourselves. What have we fulfilled since that time? And then Ntuli was asking the question, a very important question about, it's the one which I said is a Marxist question that Karl Marx asked long. Who will educate the educator so that the educator can do a new curriculum? That one is a very important question, because I think even Wathiongo puts it with 5 questions in Decolonizing the Mind. And they're saying, if you want to redo the knowledge architecture, who will do it? And what skills is that person supposed to possess? This is why from day one, I was talking about the issue of we will need to train each other into complex politics of knowledge as a continuous process, so that when we do the new curriculum is not painful. You know, if we have a colonial mind, there's something burning inside every time you try to move away from colonialism. It's like we are losing a baby. This thing is now sitting in our hearts, in our minds. People don't want to run away from it. So we need to make it painlessly that you know that I'm losing something which pains me, not something which is actually I'm supposed to possess. There is no need to possess coloniality. Online, I don't know how to respond to that. I'm sick and tired of this word. Let's be careful. I'm not a child. I know what I'm talking. For somebody to stand up and say, let's be careful, I find it to be very matronizing and patronizing. Secondly, the inability to listen, the refusal to listen. Talking about discrimination, when I spoke at length about that it is not about discrimination. And I've been subjected to this many times, and I don't want to entertain it anymore. I think, Brown, you gave us another way to think about reimagining restoration and survival. I think I accept that. It means we're digesting exactly what was given. And I want to stop here.
Actually, the last point, colleagues, in scholarship, that's not easy. Scholarship is not easy. It's about work. It's about thinking. It's about reading. It's not just about speaking. You don't just speak because there's a mic. That you leave to politicians. You don't speak because you can speak. And that's why sometimes when people are not listening, this is what is also called epistemic deafness. But it's even more than that. It's simply, sometimes it's paying respect to the people who are making a presentation. That's why I was saying, make it a habit also of writing, because the act of writing forces you to read what you are also writing. It forces an engagement. But all I want to say is that you should know, actually, Professor Ndlovukacheni is being modest. Out there, the reason why we've not made headway is because people challenge you. And you have a person coming that, I'm not prepared, but, and at Harvard they say, Chief, if you're not prepared, get off the stage, and they walk away. But we have tolerance of Mickey Mouse, a failure to be rigorous in our thinking. And it is that tolerance. But if we're not going to take ourselves seriously, nobody will take us seriously. It's as simple as that. If you spend time looking up to other people, they'll have no choice but look down to you. So the last point that you are saying, we say that let's also be serious, because when we say these things, it's because we have thought them through. And you have not thought them through, just wait until you have done your work, because that's what scholarship is all about. It is not just speaking because there's a mic. Let's have a break. And by the way, we are going to have an engagement, and we'll then round off. There's no going to be afternoon. I'm told that you guys like your afternoon very much. So Colleagues, we are coming to almost the end of our engagement, a 4-day engagement. And what I'm going to be asking the colleagues is to give the general reflections. Normally, I try to always say, if you, in business, they talk about the elevator speech, where you don't have time, but you have to sell something. What are those 3 things that you like the person you are speaking to take with? But before doing that, just want to do 2 things, and I'll do them by using examples. Professor Fanon, many years ago, I was talking to the former president, Nelson Mandela, and he was amazed that the people who came to talk to see him, there were many of them, and they were saying, "Oh, but they've come in to check how does an 80-year-old look like." We brought Professor Ngubukacheni simply to show also, not only to assist us, but to also display and show what does a good scholar looks like. And when I talk about the scholar, we're talking about the rigor in thinking, rigor in reading, and rigor in writing. And the notion of rigor is very, very important. And I was exposed to it in a different way. Many years, about 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, I was at the international conference. And the speaker was a Nigerian from Australia, very boastful person. And the respondent to him was also another Nigerian. And the guy who was on top of the game from Australia spoke. And we as South Africans were mesmerized. And when the respondent took the podium, he was so robustly critical and ruthlessly critical of his countrymen. And during lunchtime, I went to him as we were queuing, and I asked the respondent, "Why do you hate him so much?" And he looked at me, not understanding the question. He says, no, actually I was giving him an assignment for another book. And then I discovered that these guys, they are collaborators and have written a number of articles together. But they were not allowing each other to be slippery or flippant in their argument. And if we are going to deal with a hegemonic enterprise, like a coloniality of knowledge, we need to be 10 steps ahead in terms of our rigor in thinking, a rigor in writing. Because if you're not rigorous in thinking, we can rest assured what is going to come out of that. So that is the first point that why we need to be. And I say this, let me also say it to him, because he decided to have a student to study me. One student did his master's on me, and he was a supervisor. And I read the conclusions, and I didn't like them. But that's what it is. Yeah. But it was not so bad. I did not know that. Yeah. I was just surprised that somebody was studying me, yeah. And then discovered that the person who studied me then had his student to also study me again. Oh, yeah. So I said, I can't continuously be But the point is that when you are rigorous, you are also inviting people to study, to read you, to be critical. But they take the criticism to improve. One of my in this university, one of the person who has been viciously critical of me, but in a fatherly way, as has been Professor Moyo. He will not tell you that. Every time I receive an email on what I've written, I have to take a break to go and read again until I accept that it comes from a fatherly love, you know. But this is what we do. That's how scholarship advances. And people like Itume Musa talks about the ruthless criticism. And people like Cornel West talks about creation of razor sharp critiques, network of razor sharp, where we are very critical of each other. But when we do that, we get strengthened. So I simply want to say, and what I was asking Professor Ngukajeni is that, given that this area, even though he has been in it for years, over 20 years, is a decolonial scholar. So he's not, he's been almost every other argument against this, he has actually dealt with it. But I was saying it will be important at this point in time as we close to mention those elements of justification and legitimation of the discourse. Because when you do that, you are empowering us. And he has mentioned them, you know, the existential, the material, the historical, epistemic, and all that. But to just say a little bit of that as we close, so that if there's anything that we remember, it should be that aspect. But before that, I want your brother
to recognize him. That is dangerous.
Well, I think the brother love will make sure that
Thank you very much. The unfortunate part, you have said partly what I wanted to say.
Okay, good.
I wanted to talk about the questions that you raised. Those questions are very important, and I wish everyone has access to them and carries them as an ideological canvas, if you can allow me to say that. Why am I saying this? I've observed over some time while doing decolonial work, the confusion between critical work and the decolonial work. Critical work is not necessarily decolonial. That's why we need really to know what is decolonial work, what is critical work. Eurocentric work has some critical elements embedded in it. And I wanted to talk about the criticism that is loyal to Eurocentrism and the criticism that is subversive to it. We are not just doing critical work, we are doing decolonial. We want to do decolonial work. Critical work does not change much of the things because it's not on the same level. But the other thing that I want to take from what we have been presenting on is what Prof is talking about. Is part and parcel of taking ourselves serious, but also the understanding that decoloniality itself is an archive. If it is an archive, to immerse ourselves needs that we must do particular activities. One of the activities that come to my mind is the issue of seminars. Seminars, whether weekly seminars on decoloniality, on decolonial work and how we can use it. If we just end today, to be honest, I'm close to 10 years trying to master this archive.
Yeah.
I haven't mastered it enough. I imagine someone takes 1 week and they say, I know, and I've mastered it. It's a very complex thing to do. Then the other thing is the question of research at UNISO. We didn't talk much about it. To also direct our research towards decolonial, to make sure it's framed by African thought. When you want to insert ourselves in the curriculum and really make impact, we must make sure also our research. We can't be researching this direction but decolonizing curriculum. So sometimes it will be important to prescribe our own way, but we can't prescribe with people who are doing research going that other direction and the curriculum going that other direction. I think I need to end here. So
Thank you very much. Prof, the Dean.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I don't actually have questions for Prof. Ndlovu, but I think my comments are more directed at us as UniZulu community who are remaining behind when Prof. Ndlovu wants his plane back to Germany. The nuggets that I think we need to keep chewing. One of them is that what we have heard here speaks or spoke to our heads. Now we've got to find a way for this knowledge, this little knowledge that we have gained from Prof. Ndlovu, and transfer it to our hearts. Because we are not going to change anything unless what is in our heads speaks to what is in our hearts. So it's important, I guess, what the younger prof has said, that we continue the conversations, whether through seminars or whatever, but these conversations need to continue. Two, we need to find readings and read about this. Last night, I came across, I have been, ever since you came, I've been checking now to see who's writing about decolonization. And one of the articles I came across by James Lindsay, he's a big naysayer. He writes as if he's ridiculing decolonization, saying they are saying they want to decolonize the curriculum, but what they actually want to do is to do away with the rigor, with scientific methodology, and they want to replace them with, he says, with traditions and witchcraft, you know. The article is already published, it's out there. So somebody who has not heard you speak about decolonization is going to take that and believe that, oh, this is madness, I'm not going to go that way. So it's important that we immerse ourselves in reading so that we come to understand what this is about. But I am really pleading that we find a way to connect our heads and our hearts to the transformation that we want to do. I also think that in our transforming this institution, we want to make it a vehicle for mental emancipation through this curriculum transformation process that we're talking about. We have been woken up. I want to use that phrase. It's not that we've been sleeping, but we have been woken up, because it's not something that we have thought about to this extent. I know there are pockets where this has been discussed, but the extent at which we want to take it suggests that now as an institution, we are waking up and time is of essence. I would like us, before the end of this year, to come up with deliverables, you know, short-term, mid-term, long-term deliverables that we want to have from this exercise. And we've already spoken to, I think you've already spoken to Prof. Ndlovu as a historian, that they really need to start rewriting the history. I think that has already been said. And then another issue, the issue of knowledge lying in communities. We really need to take that seriously. We're not going to communities as experts, but we're going there to learn from them, to learn with them. I think that also speaks to me. And the issue of underrepresentation of other thoughts and knowledges in the knowledge sphere says to me and to my colleagues, we've got to begin writing, colleagues. It's very, very serious that we, in order for us to reclaim our space in the center, we need to start writing and shift the geography and biography of knowledge, as Prof has said. And then lastly, I want to talk about us thinking with our feet on the African ground, which Prof said. I think that is very important. We've been diagnosed, and the prescription is that we should start thinking with our feet on the African ground, and that will only come with us connecting what we have heard and what we are learning and what we will continue to learn about decolonization. As you rightfully said, it's not an event. Becoming decolonialist is not an event. It's a long journey. So as we engage, we need to involve our hearts as well, so that we believe that one, Africa has a space in the knowledge creation, and two, believe that we are capable of closing the gaps that exist in the knowledge gap, and three, taking our students along. Our students have been, I can't find the word, but the fact that they don't value knowledge says something has been destroyed within them. They don't see the value, it's not relevant, blah, 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 blah. But it will take us changing our attitude to our work, changing our attitude to our students, and then taking the institution and the agenda of education forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. You take yourself seriously. Professor Brown.
Thank you. And I think it's quite an interesting 4 days. Professor David Henry at Harvard University came up with a learning theory or a way of thinking about learning that says 3 things happen when you are exposed to learning material and you're venture off into engaging with something new and different. He said, on the one level, you might immediately connect with what you're engaging with. Immediately connect with it, you identify with it, you can relate to it. It's common ground, it's easy to deal with. So that's one level. He said, on another level, that new material might take you off on a tangent in relation to what you already understand and know. It might cause you to question a lot of things about what you already understand about the material. And then in a final level, he said, that material might cause you to go backwards before starting to come forward again. And I think over the last 4 days, we might have gone through this sort of experience in terms of the material that we've been exposed to. I know personally, there were moments when it take me backwards and then launch me back forward. There were times when it take me off on a tangent before then I regain my balance and get back on track and so on. And there were moments where I also connect immediately and so on and so forth. And I thought that was an interesting analogy, because when you look at the breadth of the highlights that I could say from what has happened over the last couple of days is clearly the colonial project has impacted on society, and this impact has been quite an enduring one over the many years of dealing with the colonial project. And it has also reshaped the whole world order. That is a major part of what lies at the center of what we have been engaging with and come to realize. Decolonizing that massive impact that colonialism has had is the grand challenge that we've been faced with. And we've been just sort of given the tip of the iceberg in this morning. And at the heart of it is power play, power dynamics, effort to shift you off balance. And I'm always going to go back to this question of power because it lies for me at the center of what we need to grapple with in terms of the colonial project. So that for me stood out. The conversation that we've had on the first 2 days, and particularly on the second day, dealing with the power question, for me is really an area that we should not lose sight of. Power manifests itself differently. Some part of it is very subtle and hidden. Other parts of it is very overt. And we must be prepared, for me, to be able to identify the subtle portion of power and when it is being played, because the playing of the power is the politics. So we must be able to identify the subtle portion of it, the hidden portion of it, and some of these may be sitting right in the curriculum. Some of it may be sitting with the policies that we're engaging with, and so on and so forth. So I think the points that Professor Mandela mentioned are quite crucial, and we always should keep the power play in mind as we look at those. I think for me, when we look at the role or the purpose for which university was designed, we are told that university was designed for the production of knowledge, for the dissemination of knowledge, for the preservation of knowledge. And Burton Clark, UCLA, add another dimension around the application and the packaging and selling of knowledge and making it relevant for industry and so on and so forth. Now, the third component for me is the one I want to play on a little bit in terms of knowledge preservation, knowledge preservation. And I think as we listen to Prof. Lachene over the last 4 days, the role of the library comes in quite in a massive way. And when we talk about restoring the African epistemologies, clearly it gives a role that the library should play. And I would like for you, Prof, to elaborate a bit more for me on that dimension, to say, how do we draw in the library in playing a big role in this phase of the project, the decolonization project, especially as it relates to these epistemology that we need to draw in. And obviously there are volumes of these that we can then allow our scholars to do more of the reading that Prof. Tombela mentioned. And then the other part, which I want to pick up in terms of over here, is around the research agenda. Currently, we have the niche areas, and clearly something is telling me already that we need to reevaluate our niche areas as a way going forward. Because I agree with him, Prof, that our research must be aligned to the intellectual consciousness that we are dealing with. And that research must feed into the curriculum in terms of pedagogy and content and so on. And so us sitting down and having a second look at our niche areas, we have done some preliminary assessment around our niche areas. We have tried to sort of think about a framework for the node itself. But I think there are bigger issues and questions that have come out from this. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that as well, Prof. Lachene, to say
what sort of research agenda do you envisage? Not to say you're going to be prescriptive, but just to draw out some strands around certain things that we would need probably to consider. And then my final point is around the restoration. You see, and I'm going to play on the restoration of self, because when you look at the social pyramid that you mentioned and where we are placed in it, and you then also talk about the perception around the Blacks in general and why they were placed there, you realize that there is a psychological impact. There is a psychological sort of a distortion of the self. And then they bring in the idea of identity as well, to say, are we who we are? Who are we really? And are we our true self as Blacks? Or are we seen as our true self has been suppressed? And what we are seeing is an imagined self, or the self that has been implanted in us. And so we are constantly at war with ourselves, because there are two personalities that we're dealing with. The real self, which is suppressed, and the colonized self, which has been imposed. So when you say, I am Byron Brown, for instance, but who is my real identity in terms of origin? I mean, I'm using myself, George. But you see, so there's that battle which which draw in the traumatized self and person that you really have to be thinking about, and say, how does that traumatized self play itself out in all of this question for restoration? Because what are we restoring in terms of the being? Because we have to go for that deeper suppressed self. How we're going to draw that out? Yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I always like when people are so clear that you don't have to ask questions. I remember somebody who, I had a professor who, when he taught classes, and if you raise a question, raise your hand, he'll get you with a shock. Almost trying to understand what part of what I said he didn't understand. Well, of course, in the women's world, when they were marching, they had this sign that I like in the US. What part of no don't you understand?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Prof. Gacheni. I'll try to be clear, although I can't guarantee that. I will hide under the caveat that words and expressions might mean different things to the one who enunciates and the one who receives.
Yes, sure.
But I think mainly is because I've tried to be very receptive of most of the things you are saying. And I realized how much of this I really didn't know, still don't know. So that has almost overwhelmed me. Not the project of decolonization per se, but what we need to know. Like when you did the whole genealogy of Black thought, Black radical thought. I really thank you for that. I agree with Prof. Ntombela that we have to have deliverables, that we have to match with very clear schedules. And even while being aware of the business caution, that we must not be surprised if we don't get things right immediately, even if we fail. Let's fall forward, let's fail trying. And I really like that. For instance, what we have learned in these past 4 days, it would be very good if we have a more drawn out, a more systematized form of engagement to allow colleagues take in things. For many of us who are in the narrative disciplines, it's not too difficult to put your head around some complex terminologies, but there are very intelligent colleagues in the other disciplines who are not used to those grammars. and who are still in your second line, whereas you are now in another page. So when you talk about ontological density, for instance, for some colleagues, it's mind when I started reading Homi Baba, I would read one paragraph for like three days before I actually got what Homi Baba was saying. So if you have a longer, a not drawn out engagement period, it will really help all of us as well. But I want to commend both the guest preacher and Prof. Siepe, and I want to recommend this for the empathy and the affective dimension of your communication. I think this is crucial to me. I think this is very crucial to the project we are engaged with. Because we can't reduce all of this to mere facts and dates. If it's existential, if it has to do with human experience and the human being, that dimension of empathy, and I know that we get criticized for that a lot. So for instance, that is where I think, or part of where the criticism of the decolonization project being ideological rather than being scientific. I think it's because many people see the empathy. They see the church dimension, if you like. They see what you might want to call maybe a political dimension. But you did say when you started speaking that you're not going to hide, because that's what it is. And it's pretense for those who are against colonization to suggest that their own discourses are not ideological. Yeah, it is the pretense of the highest order, because they have used other means of empathy and affect to dazzle, to bamboozle, and to hold people captive for many years. And then when they find that now this is part of the response, then they are quick to attack it. But I think we do need that dimension. It's also a matter of consciousness. And it boils also to the point that Dr. Ntuli also raised. How can people decolonize if their mind? So there's somewhere where beliefs and orientation, consciousness is. If that place is not touched, then the facts and the figures, I don't think will do anything. So I really thank both of you for the way you deployed that in these past few days. I would like to suggest, if I go back to Prof. Siepe's earlier suggestion, but how are you going to be ruthless without now not saying what you didn't hear? Yeah, but then I don't want to do the critique of absence. I would like the work, but I think this will come up in your forthcoming book. I saw that book 2 days ago online, and I was asking Morgan, he said it's yet to be released, where you speak about internationalism. I mean, there's no way you can withdraw from delving in the political discourses. So I think that's also very important. When we think of the coloniality of knowledge and its implications, I think we need to go beyond what is conceived as strictly academic. Because knowledge production, again, coming from a narrative literary studies point of view, over the centuries, if you read Mondimbe's The Invention of Africa, Africa was not invented merely on the basis of spurious facts and figures. Imagery played a massive part in it. The creative industries, the fiction that came out of Europe. And that's why Achebe was able to stand up against Joseph Conrad to say, this here is racism. And when he said, this here is racism, in his account, after delivering that lecture, I think in 1975, Amherst, he was almost struck physically by his colleagues in the department. That again tells you the importance of the affect in all of this. So this here, what you have here, no, it's we just critiquing and they have all that language, but he also. So I think we need to consider how the media. I think it was Prof. Mabusela in one of our groups who said, when we were talking about working intra-Africa partnerships, she said, but the dominant political discourses, media discourses about South Africa post-1994 is to construct South Africa as an exceptional space that is actually not African. So those we have to deal with also when we begin to talk about Africa and our relation. I think I'll also suggest this, Prof. But perhaps you handle it in that book. So I'm very eager to read that book, even though I've not read the previous books. But the issue there seems to be an attempt to water down the concept of decolonization. I and Morgan are actually working on a chapter to see what decolonization is not. And he has mentioned one, it's not critical theory, because decolonization challenges the very epistemic regime, whereas critical theory and your normal academic freedom will argue on the basis of a taken for granted episteme. They take the episteme for granted. So the debate doesn't really go anywhere. It doesn't challenge the foundations, whereas decolonization challenge the very epistemic foundations of what we are doing. So if I'm sure you are aware of all this talk about hegemonies. That was one of the two conferences I attended recently. Was they were discussing the decolonization of global hegemonies. Then I went to the organization. Hello, hegemony. Colonization might have hegemonic dimensions, but hegemony is not the same as coloniality. So I think it's a deliberate attempt to water down the idea of decolonization so that it becomes a concept without any real because then we are talking about we want to decolonize China. And I was asking the colleagues, when did China invade Africa? And when did we ever have Chinese district officers or we're taught Chinese? We may have issues with China, but it's different from what we are talking here. So I think maybe you also need to cover that side, the media discourses and the cultural industries, music, and how all of that reinforce the center of power around which all the world is meant to bow and gravitate around. So I would be glad to see your comments on those, maybe in your forthcoming work or in just whatever you say here. But thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, sir.
So I think that was my last. Okay. Let me start by saying I've also learned a lot from here about what the University of Zululand is trying to do. I've also been trying to understand what the academics, the intellectuals at the University of Zululand are thinking. So I was also on that agenda of really trying to get into the mind of unison. It looks like it's not a singular mind, it's a multiple mind. So I must actually thank you for opening up and for sharing how you see things. And I must say, secondly, that I never, from the beginning, took you to be people without knowledge. From the beginning, I knew you had some knowledge. And to me, I was here to provoke and see whether we can find one another. It looks like in many areas we found one another. And then thirdly, you must ask me, why did I have the confidence to speak on these issues? It's a question which we need to answer. Why do I risk my life? Not that you are going to kill me. You can disagree with me, embarrass me, you can do anything, you can do anything. And what gives me the confidence to stand and project what I'm projecting? Not only here, I've spoken in many places across the world. One advantage which I always draw from is that I've been a student, like all of you. I have also been a foot soldier of academia, like all of you. And I've also attempted to administrate. So I'm speaking from that experience. I have tried also activism. I've been trying to, the most interesting part of my career is when I was not in administration, when I was a foot soldier, I would criticize everything which I wanted to criticize. But that then ended up making people invite me into administration. The ball game changes. The ball game changes. I remember my first days as a director, raised my hand and then I cut into what they are saying. Then somebody said, but Prophet Lobogajeni, you seem not to understand your new role. You are no longer an activist, you are now an administrator. So who are you criticizing? Because you are now part of extended management. That was the word. So I'm drawing from that experience to speak about so many issues. And the other confidence, I draw it from the fact that I've been doing research myself on these issues which I'm talking about. And I've been criticized for heavily to publish a book. And people will say whatever they want to say, as long as their names won't be known. They can say anything. So I've passed through that, and I always maintained that, but this is what I think is the right thing. So I will take the comments, then firm up my argument of what I want to say. So I found that to be, it gives me confidence to speak on these issues. Then the other issue which have arisen here, how rigorous should we be? Again, speaking from experience, decoloniality is not readily accepted. It is not readily accepted, whether it is in journals, whether it is book presses, whether it is conferences. Morgan will tell you the experience which we once had at Codesria, where the seminar room was turned into a battlefield when we began to introduce this. It became pandemonium. If I can put it that way, we are yet to write the memoirs and record what was happening. But that is the experience where we come from, whereby if you have a strong idea that I've researched this thing thoroughly, I can present it anyway, and I will be able to defend it. And there will be a number of moments for defense. And the way you defend is not to be angry. The way you defend is really to bring, in Julius Malema's terms, superior logic. Superior logic. So we need to really know that it won't be a simple walk across the park. It doesn't work that way. But we also need to be careful about the concept of rigor. Wanting to be rigorous. I remember when we met Walter Mignolo for the first time, other colleagues immediately said to him, no, our papers are being rejected because we are bringing this question of decoloniality. So we feel like we are frustrated. And Mignolo responded by saying, what else did you expect? What else? This is a thought which disturbs. I think it was Brown who put it, that the mental process puts you into, first of all, you can reject, secondly, you accept, thirdly, you have these parts and all that. Then critics, those who are hired as reviewers, and we protect them by saying they must not tell us who they are. So they have the field day when it comes to something which they don't want. So it's important that way. But what I wanted to caution about critique, I think Morgan maybe picked it well. In decoloniality, we don't want to win battles. I'm sorry, we don't want to win battles, we want to win wars. You get the issue. So we don't want to win a battle of 30 minutes. That I will walk like a bull after I've decimated my brother there in a seminar of 30 minutes. Then that's it. We are not working that way. And in that area, I wrote a piece, which was a popular piece, which is entitled the Gladiator Scholarship. You know, the gladiators destroying one another over 30 minutes in order to appear clever than the other. We were careful about doing that because as we put it here, there is an intentionality at the end. So is the deconstruction with an intention to construct. So there is a scholarship. I was trained at the University of Zimbabwe, and the University of Zimbabwe was almost like Nigeria. They reduce you to nothing, to nothing. It's like a war. So I always tell my people under my mentorship, I don't want to dehumanize you in order to be serious scholars. I will use persuasion. I will use other means to make you rigorous without necessarily making you, because there is a danger of making people lose confidence in themselves. So we need to also understand the politics involved there. And then Morgan, when we are speaking about the issue of critical work vis-a-vis decolonial work, it reminded me of an article which I will recommend by Emmanuel Wallerstein, which talks about anti-Eurocentric Eurocentrism. Anti-Eurocentric Eurocentrism. That you can be critical of Eurocentrism, but still operating within Eurocentrism. And the most of what is called critical theory suffers from that. Then coming to Prof. Tombela, I think one thing which is emerging is that we will learn while doing. And this is inevitable in an intellectual space. Even to write a good article, you write it and you learn how to make it a good article, isn't it? You don't wait until I'll write a good article. You write it and they learn and they be criticized until you make it a good article, then it is published. So in this sphere, there is no time to wait to be perfect. The moment is not there. You need to do some of the things while we are learning to do them. And the Zapatista movement in Mexico always say, no, we will learn while fighting. We will learn while fighting. But to invoke, I fear to always invoke metaphors, because metaphors can mess up things. This metaphor, which says, is a military metaphor, which says, more sweat in training, less blood in back. More sweat in training, less blood in back. The more we train each other rigorously, the less blood when we encounter those who are opposite. So it's a metaphor which is very, very, very important. I work with that, but I must be rigorous in order not to embarrass myself. So I always work with that. And then Ntombela also mentioned the issue of the critique of decoloniality. And I think I tried maybe during the first day or second day to talk about how do we deal with criticism. It's like all thought, it will be exposed to various critiques. But how you deal with it, one of the most disappointing part about the critique of decoloniality is that there are people who caricature. You know, when you caricature something, trying to caricature, trying to minimize, trying to make fun of. Then there is selective reading. Then there is deliberate distortion. There is deliberate misinterpretation. It makes it easier for us to respond once you do that. Because, like all thought, you can't stand up and say, I'm criticizing decoloniality. You need to mention who you are criticizing. It's thorough scholarship. There is Mignolo comes from semiotics. There's myself, I come from history. There are other people coming from. Who are you criticizing exactly? So it's important that the critique also, they need to carry the burden of rigor. The critics also must carry the burden of rigor. It doesn't lie with us only. I think, Brown, when you raise the issue of, first of all, a new idea comes and how you respond to it, I think the attempt to say learning to unlearn in order to relearn was meant to capture that. It was meant really to capture that in education, we might have an acquisitive metaphor. What acquisitive metaphor? Acquire more and more knowledge. But do we have a metaphor for forgetting and learning? It doesn't come out clearly, but it only comes out in traditional medicine. Traditional medicine, they can give you another medicine to remove what is inside. So that metaphor comes from that, whereby some things need to come out because they were meant for something else, or they are now toxic to your body. So it works that way. And I wanted also to introduce another term that we have knowledge for domination, knowledge for control, knowledge for exploitation. The decolonial approach is knowledge for re-existence. Knowledge for re-existence. And the Brown spoke about the importance of the library. We started talking about it in the corridors again. That's an important aspect which we must bring in. Thinking about the library, the building here, where they keep books, but also thinking about library in terms of systems of knowledge and the orders of knowledge. Remember, V.Y. Mutimbe talks about the pervasiveness of the colonial library. How do you do decolonial work while working with a colonial library? That is an important, and the Mutimbe says, it looks like the exits are very few from the colonial library. The exits are very few. But you'll find scholars like Toyin Falola saying there's a ritual library. The ritual library. That ritual library, even colonialism failed to interpret, to penetrate. So there is the ritual library where we can think from there and see what we can do. Then the Latin Americans, they tell us there is a border. There is a border where you can come from, don't always come from the center. So we find all these trying to open the exits out of the colonial library. But the colonial library is what all of us were trained in. So basically, to decolonize, as questions were coming about where do you start, it always starts with us. Ashish Nadi said something which starts in the minds of people must actually come to an end there, in the mind of, because it starts from there. So he said it must actually come. Then in terms of research agenda and the niche areas, I will link that with the focus question. I always try to say to people, we don't do decolonization or decoloniality. We don't do it. We use it as a lens. But the issues which we deal with are issues which all of you know. And I will give an example. The book which I wrote, which is going to be published by Codesria, I think I alluded to it before, it's beyond the coloniality of internationalism, rewelding the world from the global south. And don't be captured by the tide. But what is the content? The content really is provoked by the Russia-Ukraine war. So I'm intervening in that problematic space, but from a decolonial point of view. You get it. So you can deploy decolonial thinking or decolonization to understand climate. You can deploy decolonial thinking to understand gender. So the research agendas can actually be very familiar issues, but the perspective, and then you put also the African thought, which is the preferred departure point here. So the issues really of the niche areas, don't call them decolonial this, decolonial that. the problems are the problems, but what do you think is the best scholarship to enlighten it? You get the point. So it's like we used to have this debate with others saying they are from an African Renaissance perspective. So I'm saying, to say that, is it not similar to say I'm using socialism? Socialism is what we envisage at the end as an outcome. But the methodology is the dialectical materialism, isn't it? So it is like that. So this one is really an approach. It is more than an approach. It's a method, it's more than a method. It's a struggle as well. So it is many things. So we need really to when we then draw a research agenda, it might be common things, but a different approach and a different interpretation. Ngugi wa Thiong'o, when he wanted to articulate decolonization, and he said we must, and I'm using his words, we must coldly and consciously check what imperialism has been doing to us in the universe. We must coldly and consciously understand what imperialism has been doing to us in the universe and how it has affected our positionality in relation to other selves and the other beings. So he was giving really a very planetary articulation of the issues. The question of empathy, which I know it also takes into account the question of feelings and emotions. I did last year give the annual William Amo lecture at Martin Luther University in Germany. And this is a 17th century philosopher, Amo, black 17th century philosopher, somebody who was taken as a slave. And then he was taken to Netherlands, then he was sold to a German Juku or something like that. And they ended up an academic. And they taught at the University of Jena and then at Martin Luther University. This black thinker who was taken to Africa at 13, he was taken from Ghana at 13. He engaged with the 17th century European philosophers. And they were saying there is no way we can remove motion and the feeling in knowledge production. He challenged them directly that there is no way you can remove motion and the feeling in knowledge production. And in decolonial thought, people always say, but our emotions, they warm reason. Our emotions, they warm reason. Reason can be cold and meaningless, but when we put the emotions, it becomes warm and meaningful. I think I will end with that. Thank you so much.
I like the part about warm. Because I do remember those of us who are trained in the scientists in the sciences, natural sciences, the notion of being dispassionate is the way to go. And one of my friends who's a social scientist, I was saying to him that he needs to be less angry, but he must be rational and cool. He says, no, the more I think, the angrier I become, because what you're saying is so much nonsense. So the anger does not come because he is a less of a thinker. The anger comes from the more he thinks, the more he realizes how much he's insulted. So the whole notion of the connection of emotions and reasoning is not that clear cut, although we are being socialized into thinking that that is so. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of our journey, at least for this week. The fundamental issue that an objective was really to tease the idea of decoloniality. And I want to put my head on the block to say, I'm going to try to put a report on this. And the report could come either way. It could end up being a book. But I would like to appeal to the colleagues who were rapporteurs. Fortunately, you are known. You can't hide. I'd like you to actually make those submissions, if you can send them to Professor Ndlovu local. Just send them to him by email, then I'll get to that, and we'll try to see how we can put that together. The idea behind the idea of decoloniality was really to provide the tools of engagement and also to provide the key concepts that are associated with decoloniality. And within that, there's a notion of a coloniality of power, coloniality of knowledge, coloniality of identity, and also the biographies and the geographies that we often use when we talk about that. So that was the most important aspect of what are the key concepts, what are the tools of engagement. It's about empowerment. You know, when you meet guys who have done MBA, there's a language that they use, but this is a language of engagement. And if you go into the boardrooms and you don't speak that language, they ask, when are you going to start talking to us? Because you are not talking in the language. So this is about providing us with those tools. But the other issue, Professor Moyo, which I thought is necessary for this, is the discourse around the scholarship of concealment and the scholarship of revelation. That a lot of things that talks about our inadequacies, most of that is driven by the scholarship of concealment, where you are not told the truth. For instance, if you now have the rankings of universities, you have a university like Solplaatje University, which is almost 10 years, and it's compared in the rankings with the University of Cape Town. And they say, look at the Solplaatje, it is down there. but they don't tell you that this one is 100 years or 100 years old. And this one, they don't tell you about the resources. They don't tell you, the disadvantages that are built in. So that is the politics of the scholarship of concealment. Yet we still find some of us wanting to be part of that. And if you are going to be part of that, you'll always be found to be inadequate. So the whole one of the concepts that will become very important, so that when you enter into the world, you don't enter into the world as a junior. Actually, some of us have actually bought the idea that there are some who are junior and some become perpetual teachers of others. And what is interesting is some of us have no problem in being perpetual students. I had a very interesting experience of it when I went to one university where I took a position as a head of the department. On my arrival, there was a student who had just graduated, got in their B.Ed. And then I was told that there's a workshop, and I went to that workshop. And this young girl, white, was talking to professors. She just had a B.Ed. And the professors were taking notes, guys with PhDs, writing furiously. And I asked the question, how can you guys be taught by this? And of course, she said, Professor Sepe, I did not invite myself, I was invited. But it never dawned on her that she's going to talk to people who are highly qualified. But the people who are highly qualified, who are Black, they were just comfortable being perpetual students. But again, it's those politics and the scholarship of concealment, and also our entry in the world. We'll be having a discussion later this next month around the work of Manganyi. This book, famous book, Being Black in the World, is one of those things that we'll deal with. But what they were expressing was being Black in the world, where you are always a perpetual student. So if you understand that will be very important, because it is liberatory discourse. As you said, we are here to also get the grammar and the vocabulary that will help us to engage the world confidently and intelligently. Not only confidently, but intelligently. Because as Professor Ndlovu Kacheni was saying, that he has read, he has researched, Then the other issue that he had raised, and also one must actually acknowledge the point that Professor Ndlovu Local was saying, that there is a critique of scholarship that is loyal to that scholarship. But there's a critique that is subversive. We need to make a clarity that not everything that's critical is decolonial, but it's also about the lens. In my first book, which strangely, the Black Perspective on Tertiary Transformation, which was published in 1998, one of the interesting things is that 22 years later, I called the people who participated in that conference to say what went wrong, and also that they needed to read. And I was listening to one of them, Professor Nkondo, explaining to me what was profound about even the title, perspective, Black perspective. And I must say, he understood me more than I understood myself, because I found that what I said was more profound than I had intended. But the concept of a lens through which you enter, those in the Black consciousness movement talk about BC as a philosophy of life. But they say it allows you to be a lens that if you come up with a policy, they ask, it may be a wonderful policy talking about efficient and cost effective and all that. And they say, but what does it mean for Black people? And then you discover, and then they'll remind you, but apartheid in itself was very efficient. You can't oppress so many people, and it was also cost efficient, But when you start having a lens then you make certain things visible. So the notion of decoloniality, decolonial scholarship as both perspective, as a struggle, and also a method, it becomes very critical in what what we will also do is that we will also take some of the elements that Professor Ndlovu talked about when it comes to the notion of decolonial scholarship, that what are the elements that of legitimation and argument that you make around, as he put it, among other things, that there's a historical element, there's an existential element, there's epistemic element, there are other elements. We'll make sure that those are teased out. But also the book on epistemic freedom is one of those that we should have in the library. Professor Ntombela, you're also raising another important issue, that issue of engagement. In the submission this week, Professor Ndlovu did talk about various schools, that how do you begin to create something like the Dar School, the Frankfurt School, but these are serious networks of critical intellectual habits. I'll repeat, these are serious networks of critical intellectual habits where we refine our thinking. And I'm saying that because what Professor Ndlovu was also saying is that the decolonial scholarship is not easily accepted. So that actually tells you that it's not going to be easy. It is not going to be easy. So it is not going to be a walk in the park. So having gone through this, I simply want to take this opportunity to thank him for your valiant efforts, and I must say probably successful efforts in trying to persuade us that there is a possibility of one of the thinking caps that we can use. But like Mandela said, I've tried, this has been a long walk to freedom. I've tried not to falter. I have made missteps along the ways, but I discovered the secret that after climbing one hill, there are many more hills to climb. You will find that in this journey, there will be those challenges. But what we have here in the decolonial scholarship is what Professor calls the practice of freedom, the means by which men and women participate in the transformation of their world. With that, ladies and gentlemen, may I thank you for coming. May I thank you for being here for all this time. And may I also thank the colleagues who were intervening and those who were interventionists. There's a difference between those. And but I also want to say, Professor Ndlovu, this is not the end, nor the beginning of the end, but perhaps the end of the beginning.
On the sunshine, guys.